Thank you. We are adjourned. We will now begin the Mesa City Council study session for Thursday, April the 9th. The first item on this agenda is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on the impact of COVID-19 on the city's financial position, forecast, and budget modification recommendations, focusing on project deferral recommendations. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a couple of different presentations. I think we're going to first start off with the PowerPoint related to the capital projects delay recommendations, and we're going to let Mr. Butler start with that. And then after that, we will then bring, we're going to have Candace and Brian present the financial status presentation.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. This morning I'm here to provide a list of recommendations for the delay of capital projects, as well as some one-time capital purchases pending our evaluation of the economic downturn, as well as the forecasted recovery. By no means is this intended to be the end of the discussion. This is something that we'll continue to evaluate and update council as we progress. In terms of the evaluation, some of the things that went into our planning is understanding the goals of projects in terms of serving the community. This would include things like safety or system reliability in order to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the community. We also consulted with our various client departments as well as engineering staff, and I want to express our appreciation to Beth Huning, our city engineer, as well as her staff, and then our client departments across the city for their assistance in helping us to evaluate. And then the other thing that we've considered is the effect that we can have on some of our regional partnerships in terms of service delivery. The example I'll give is our work with the Topaz Regional Alliance for Public Safety Communication. We continue to work with them to evaluate some of the projects that were planned over the next couple of fiscal years to make sure that we can meet the system reliability needs of the group. In terms of the specific items and projects that we looked at, first we considered capital projects that are included in the capital improvement program. As that's a planning document, it's a good guide for us to be able to evaluate those projects. Inside of that, we have the operations and maintenance that are included in some of our capital projects. These are projects that would obligate the city to ongoing operational cost. As I mentioned, we also considered some of the one-time capital purchases that are planned, and then we also evaluated our life cycle infrastructure plans that address various assets across the city. Some of the basic criteria that we used in terms of our evaluation is projects that are not currently under construction. I do want to note that we do have some minor parks improvements, playground and equipment purchases that are nearing completion, and so we looked at those in terms of what remaining balances there may be available for us to include in this estimate. The majority of the other projects are not under any obligation or currently under construction. We looked specifically at our projects that have activity either in the current fiscal year or are planned for next fiscal year in 2020, 2021. And then for this initial review, we looked specifically at projects that have an impact to the general fund. This is just a summary slide to provide you a glimpse of the totals. We've separated the projects into 4 categories. They include communications and technology, various city facility improvements, parks and culture, and then some public safety improvements. The next several slides just provide you some examples of the projects that are included in the numbers from the summary slide. So specifically, we've worked with Topaz and the Topaz board. That work continues in terms of the evaluation of system reliability, but these projects are ones that the Topaz board has suggested that we could delay pending the forecasted recovery. The closed-circuit television replacement is some purchases that were planned for city facilities that we can delay at this time. Some examples of some of the city facility improvements. There was re-roofing plan for 708 West Baseline, lighting replacement at the IDEA Museum, and then some electrical upgrades at the Red Mountain Multi-Generational Center that we can delay. In terms of some of our parks and culture improvements, there were some planned machines for automation at the library, park signage updates, some playground equipment replacement, as well as Ramada replacement at existing parks. And then in terms of public safety, these were some planned improvements. They include an upgrade to the mapping and camera system that is used on our police helicopters, as well as fingerprint units, and then working to identify some of the small vehicle replacements that are within the fire department. These are not apparatus purchases, but these are more of the small vehicles that are used by the department. The next couple slides, I wanted to take some time to just highlight the plan for various projects that are included in the capital improvement program today. So these are projects where we are recommending to defer design or delay the design schedule. Some of these projects are scheduled for a couple of years out, and we are not recommending a change to that. And so these projects would be held until pending the forecasted recovery when we can start design and other project activities. This next slide talks about a recommend for us to defer construction activities. So these next two slides, these are projects where we have activity going on today. It may be design, it may be land acquisition. Our recommendation is that we continue to navigate the land acquisition process as well as the design process, and that when those are complete, then we would delay construction pending our estimated recovery. Some of the projects on this list, including Harris Basin Playground, for example, design is completed, and we are just pending construction on that project. So we recommend a delay in the construction. This is the remainder of those lists. You can see Monterey Park, North Center Street Park, the Northeast Public Safety Facility, as well as the improvements and expansion at Red Mountain Park. Again, we would recommend that we continue to progress through design and the land acquisition process on these projects, and then we would just halt once those projects are completed, and then evaluate construction as part of the process. So as far as our next steps, we're proposing that we evaluate monthly and that we can provide updates to City Council regarding the ongoing status of various capital projects. We're going to continue to work with our client departments and engineering to evaluate not only those projects in the general fund, but other funds to see if there are projects where a delay can be recommended. We're going to continue to work internally and with city staff to evaluate the economic downturn and expected recovery. And then we're also going to evaluate federal programs that may be coming out or other federal grants that will be devoted to capital infrastructure to see if we can utilize those similar to what we did in 2008. I do want to mention that included in the presentation information to council, there was a detailed list of projects provided, so you'll have that to review. And if there's any questions, I can answer those.
Thank you, Scott. I have just a quick question to kick things off. I know in our previous meetings, we've been all looking at various models, trying to anticipate when the peak of the virus is going to occur in Arizona, what that bell curve is going to look like. So from a public health projection viewpoint, I mean, I know we've seen those models. I assume in the municipal finance world, you know, there's similar modeling going on or speculation going on as to what the duration and the severity of the financial impact is going to be on the economy and on cities. Are we already looking at various models at this point, or is it still too early to make an educated guess on some of those things?
So Mayor and Council, I think that last part is what you just said is the most important. There is no educated guess right now. We've never experienced anything like this before. We'll present, in the next presentation, we'll show to you, Candace will explain what we've built in to our current estimation. But frankly, it's not a very educated guess because we haven't even seen what sales tax receipts are for March, and we won't see those till the end of May. And then we can only imagine what April's going to look like. You can drive around and you don't see spending taking place. So, and then how long that's going to last, we're just not sure. But certainly March and April have been in the past some significant times when we've collected sales tax. Certainly that drops off during the summer months. But again, we just don't know how deep and how long that is. But we've had to build in some assumptions, and I think Candace can talk a little bit more about those. But, you know, I'm getting calls from city managers all over the valley. I talked with GPEC yesterday. Everybody's asking everybody else what they think because there's really just no specific model that anybody can see out there right now.
I know early, and I know Candace is up next, but I know earlier we've talked about how this economic downturn came sooner and it's more severe than we anticipated, but there's also the possibility, you know, relatively short, given that it's not tied to any real economic issues, it's tied to health issues. So
True.
I guess
Yeah, no.
we'll find out, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Mayor, and I think that's why we just don't know. I do think what we would tell you is even without the pandemic, we were already anticipating a slowing down of the economy next year. So but we don't know how much this is going to compound that cyclical part of the economy already, or that was already assumed. But you know, that's why we want to, throughout this presentation, this one and the next one, Mayor, what we're suggesting to council is because we just don't have a lot of confidence in what we don't know, is that we'd like to return to council every 30 days and have that kind of an evaluation and assessment so that we have the flexibility, either direction, to move if we need to make adjustments.
Okay. Thank you. Council, questions regarding Mr. Butler's presentation?
I got a question, John.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Brady. Yes, Jeremy.
Yeah, hey, Scott, I'm not seeing the ASU projects on here. Can you give us an update on if we're moving forward with that project or not?
I believe that was on the list that was sent to you yesterday.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it in the PowerPoint presentation, so I assume we're moving forward with that project.
Well, like we said, we are only including projects that are not under construction, that we don't have a financial haven't already committed a financial obligation to. So that's the projects we're proposing that be deferred at this time.
Yeah, I guess my concern is, you know, we're picking apart these projects that are relatively small when, you know, we have this ASU project that's over $100 million. And if we're moving forward with that and it's barely broken ground, you know, I think all projects, as I stated in the last meeting, you know, need to be on the table for scrutiny to make sure that we're saving our money adequately to prepare for what's about to hit us.
So Mayor and Council, let me just be very clear. It's not over $100 million. We're very clear that there's a cap. We have already made obligations to contractors. If you want to come by City Hall and come look out my window, there's a lot of work going on, a lot of trenching, a lot of pipe being put in the ground. So And in council, I can't remember how, a month ago, also, we obligated ourselves to the second phase of construction. So we have legal obligations now. We've got contractors who are bringing in materials, supplies, labor. So we just don't believe that that would be in our best interest to delay that project. One, financially, the penalties would be significant. And two, because the project doesn't come online until 2.5 years from now. And right now, we think that that might be one of those projects that would help stimulate and help bring life back into downtown once it's completed.
I do. Yeah, so are we saying that we have no force majeure stipulations in these legal contracts that don't allow us to get out of these contracts?
Mayor and council, if council wants us to do a legal review on particular contracts, we can do that. But until council gives us direction, we'll move forward to those contracts that we have obligations on. Obviously, it'll take us time to do contract by contract. And on the ASU project, it's not just the construction contract. We also have a contract with ASU itself.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Luna.
Yes, what I wanted to say that I think that having the ASU project is going to be crucial to our recovery in this current economy. We know that as a result of the COVID virus, we're going to experience some severe hardships. ASU is certainly going to add to the recovery of this economy in the city of Mesa. So we certainly want to continue where we're at with ASU.
Thank you. Other questions regarding this agenda item, council?
Yeah, I got one last thing, John.
All right.
We're seeing 17 million people filed for unemployment in March. And, I think it's clear the economic implications of what's going on right now are similar to what happened in the 1930s. And, if we're going to sit here and our next presentation is going to be, trying to decide which city employees we're going to lay off, then I believe that it's unfair to not scrutinize every single project that we're going to be spending money on, especially, and this is collective, right? Like, so the ASU project includes, the park, it includes interest on the sales tax excise bonds that we took out. So yes, this project is in excess of $100 million. And I just want to make clear, I get that council doesn't want to stop these pet projects, but I think it's at least time to have the conversation about putting them on delay.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you. I mean, this is the conversation that hasn't stopped for 2 years, and people have been looking for political opportunities to attack the project. I think that's inappropriate. Yes, we are no one is underestimating the significance of the economic downturn. But I think that the presentation that we just saw indicates it's also possible to overreact to this situation and to dig a deeper hole that we're eventually going to need to climb out of. As Mr. Brady indicated, this project is not a $100 million project. There are other related projects that you can pile on top of it, but that's not what we're talking about. The city's participation is capped at a little over $60 million. That will be paid off over the course of 20 years. The financing, when the bonds are issued, I think right now the estimate is that the approximate annual payment is going to be a little over. So I think if we overreact and we all of a sudden start sending hundreds of workmen that are working around town home, the economic impact of that will just be a downward spiral. And when this event, this financial event, in addition to the medical event, is over, we eventually need to pull out of this. And ASU is really going to be an impetus to allow that to happen.
So, Mayor, can I just say something real quick?
So again, I think we need to. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Brady.
I'm sorry, Mayor. I think my point would also be is we're very optimistic that we're going to get through this. And that's what we've told our employees, is that's what we're telling you, that's what we're telling our community. We think these are going to be rough times for a little while, but we're very optimistic about how we've positioned ourselves. I've been in conversations with Bill Jibginiak every week. There's still a lot of optimism out there as far as investing in Mesa. We have some major projects that are continuing to follow up with. So, yeah, I think these are going to be some rough times, and that's why we're talking about deferring projects, not canceling or eliminating projects. We believe that almost all these projects at some point will be completed, but we need some space, some time to get through these rough points. But we're very optimistic about the globe and about Mesa, Arizona. We think that we're going to overcome this. This is a different dynamics economically, and so I just want to make sure everybody understands is we're trying to buy time right now, and that's why we first went to one-time projects. One-time projects are not an ongoing solution, but they buy us time and help us save dollars so that we can keep operations going. So we're optimistic that we're going to come out of this and we'll be able to get back to a lot of these projects. And the projects that are under construction now, many of them are not going to be completed for 2+ years. We're very optimistic that we'll have a solution to the pandemic by then, and that we'll be on the road to financial recovery. We just don't know how soon that will take place.
Okay, thank you. Let's go. I see several hands. We'll start with Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think to Chris's point as well, I'm still, even though we're not meeting in person, I continue to have meetings almost daily, if not every other day, with zoning attorneys and developers. And though things have slowed slightly, there's still a lot of optimistic developers out there that are still moving forward with projects and still meeting. Our pre-submittal list that came out the other day for District 6 at least, still had 3 or 4 projects on it. So there's still activity going on, and I think is good for Mesa, and I think it's good for the economy that developers are still interested in coming to Mesa. I think we've made the statement that we're still open for business. So just because City Plaza is vacant doesn't mean that we're closed out. Everything's being done online, and developers are adjusting as our zoning attorneys are adjusting as our developers. And like I said, people are pumping the brakes a little bit, but the construction's moving forward as far as I can see in District 6. It hasn't slowed down.
Thank you. Mr. Luna.
I have to echo Mr. Thompson's presentation. I've had 3 developers call me this week wanting to have projects in District 5. So there is momentum. It's slowed down a little bit, but we know our economy is going to recover. So I think what Scott has presented, we're on the right path. We just need to hold on a little bit, defer just for a little bit. But our economy is going to recover, and I appreciate the development community continue to move forward in District 5 anyway.
Thank you. I know I saw some other hands. Other comments, council? Thank you. Let's go with Frankie and then Jen.
Yeah, no, just a comment around unemployment. I also had many companies, from painting companies to drywall companies, calling me about, keeping jobs going. Yes, we've had a tremendous amount of folks apply for unemployment, but if we keep on these projects that can add to the workforce, is going to be important for our residents and our community to still have a job, and hopefully we can maintain some of these projects moving forward. And that's, I think, as we move along, we will look into every project, but as much as we can do to ensure that our people have jobs that adhere to the safety standards, of course, to what the crisis is dealing with. I think it's going to be important for us to ensure that we move forward with these contracts and jobs that we have on the docket. So,
okay, thank you, Frankie. Any other comments? Yes, Jen.
My comments were very similar to what Frankie made, where is to keep those jobs in those segments, and especially when it comes to labor and service type jobs, wherever we can keep those jobs going that are already obligated and underway, we need to. It's adding to the problem. There are many jobs out there that are lost because of shutdowns. And if we don't have to shut down a project midway and eliminate those jobs, we shouldn't. We need to keep people employed where we can, and especially in the labor and service industries, which are the hardest hit by the shutdowns. Also, just a comment in support of the ASU project and how significant it is for our city and especially the downtown area with the closures that we're experiencing around the arts facilities, which the businesses around those facilities are very dependent on those organizations to not have any outlook of something that is going to really help us reemerge from all this. It is just going to set us back 20 years in the whole area there. It is something that we need and support, and it is something we've been looking forward to in our viability as an economy for our downtown and entire city. So we must continue with that, but because it is important to our future. So I just wanted to convey my comments and support of the ASU project, not only for our economy, but for the jobs related to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor. Out on the farm today, but I support the list that our presentation had there. I think our conversations about whether we should defer this project or that, or large capital projects, is not necessary. We go to ASU, then are we going to shuttle our wastewater treatment renovation out at the Greenfield wastewater station? No, we're not going to do that. We have obligations of larger categories, and we're already, those contractors are working hard at those contractors and workers like Councilmember Duff has mentioned. Yesterday, I met for an hour and a half with developers on possible zoning things happening in my district. Things are moving. They're just a little bit slower, but developers and land use attorneys, they're working and leveraging these opportunities in our society. And so again, I support staff's recommendations, even though I know it's hard. I think got aircraft flying overhead and tree chippers working in the background. So things are busy around here. So thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Mark. I can send my son over to mow the lawn if that would help with the audio a little later. Okay, I know we're actually in the middle of a presentation, so Mr. Brady, why don't you want to proceed with Candace, and then we can maybe continue this conversation after the rest of the presentation.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. So what we want to do today is really give you an update on our response, the city's response, and how we're looking at the different departments and then the city as a whole and what that schedule would look like. So just as a reminder so here we're going to talk about our tiered response, and that's how we're responding to this particular issue or crisis, is a tiered response. We don't want to underreact, and we also don't want to overreact. So the first thing we're doing, we talked about in the previous presentations, is our initial response is that we've already identified reserves in the past, and we've set these reserves aside for the last few years, and we have those available if we need to use those this year or next year. We've also done a pause on any ongoing expenses, and you heard that in Scott's presentation of those particular projects. Projects we're looking at are those that either use the general fund for the project itself or are using the general fund for the operations and maintenance of that project, and that would be new expenses. And so those are all on pause at this point, as well as vacant positions. So recruiting, doing any kind of new recruitment activity for those that are not in the essential or critical areas, those are also on pause at this point. And then, so that's kind of our initial, that allows the city to stop, assess, and then move forward in a logical manner. So our short-term response we talked with you about last week. This is kind of our 45 to 60 day kind of response. What are we doing right now and how are we approaching this? These are impacting the facilities we talked about last week. So that's going to be 3 different departments have closed facilities today. That is our Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities Department, our Library Services Department, and our Arts and Culture Department. So we did come to you last week with those, and we're going to talk a little bit more today about the details. Last week, we just really talked about the lost revenues or anticipated lost revenues, as well as what type of expense savings could we look at or go for because those are shuttered. And we will talk about those today. The other thing that we talked about, and Scott mentioned it a little bit, this is an ongoing process. This is a fluid process. And so we'll be looking monthly as we receive more information and more data about our sales tax receipts, about what we're seeing around the Arizona on their sales tax receipts as well, because we do have state shared revenues that impact us. And we'll be looking at those each month and doing that assessment. So not only on the health side, but also on the economy side. We're also looking at doing a midterm response, and we'll be coming back to you. This is going to be a review of all city departments, so not just the ones that are affected immediately, but across the city, and what is our citywide response that we'll be looking at, and what do we need to look at for ongoing operational modifications. So as we go into our short-term kind of response, when we talk about parks, recreation, and community facilities, Last week, we did talk about they're estimating lost revenues of about $3.2 million for those programs and facilities that are currently closed and will not be able to open in the near future. Because they are closed, though, we do have some expense savings that we can apply to that. And at this point, they're basically will be able to cover the expenses that we will avoid by the facilities being closed and the programs not being put on. We'll cover the revenues that they are anticipating losing. When it comes to personnel, there were questions on what personnel would be affected. In this particular department, we do not have any full-time employees impacted at this point. There are part-time employees, and you can see the amount of work, the amount of just staff that it takes to put these programs on. If you can look, there's 399 employees that would normally be employed over the summer for these programs. Some of them are here active. We have 386. We have 7 with benefits, 386 that are we call them part-time, no benefits. These are going to be the less hours per week that they work. And there are 386 of those employees. They also have vacant positions within their department. So they currently have, as a department as a whole, which is not just these programs, but also our facility maintenance side of the house, is they have 21 FTEs. So remember, FTE is a full-time equivalent. So those could be part-time, full-time. And those are currently vacant, and we would be recommending to hold those vacant as well as impacting these other employees from now through October 1st. So everything we're talking about today is the August or April through September timeframe. Again, this is our short-term review. The next slide just really gives you an overview of the different types of programs that would be impacted in this particular department. We're not going to review them, but we wanted to make sure we included them for your information. The second department impacted by the closed facilities is the library services. Library services does not receive revenues, and so we don't have any revenues to make up in their area. However, we do have costs that we can avoid for citywide. You can see those there. So there's some avoided costs, about $590,000 for items they would no longer need right now in the short term because the facility is closed. Those are things like custodial, utilities, security, which is contracted security, as well as our community navigator, which is also a contract. The Mesa Express Library was set to move to a new location. That lease actually fell through, and we were not obligated in that location at this time, so there's no financial obligation to that, which is really good news because we would have had a new financial obligation and not actually been able to open up the facility due to the health concerns. So there are some savings there on not only the lease, but also the startup costs to put that site together. So we've got some savings there. We had some new operational costs that were set to come on board this year with improvements that we were going to make to the Main and Dobson library branches. Those library branch improvements are on the list that was just reviewed to be delayed or postponed. That would also then delay the staff costs and the one-time costs to set those up. So we've got some one-time savings there and then some delayed savings of not bringing new personnel on for those particular programs. At the end of the day for library services in our short-term review, Again, no full-time positions are impacted at this time. However, we do have 17 employees in part-time positions that would be impacted, as well as they do have some vacant positions. We would continue vacant at least through October 1st. Again, we've included the different programs and services that are impacted in library services. One of the good things about library services is they can continue some of their services in an online capacity, and they are moving some of their efforts into that online capacity. So decrease in book purchases over the next 6 months, but maybe an increase in online digital availability of products. Our last department that currently has closed facilities is Arts and Culture. Their estimated loss in revenues between now and October 1st is approximately $4.7 million. The same way with our Parks and Recreation area. Due to the facility being closed, they have looked at all of the expenses that they can avoid by those being closed and have identified expenses that are equal to or greater than the revenues that they are currently anticipating to have lost. Again, this is just through September, so through October 1st. This does not take into account any revenues that may be lost due to the inability to book ahead for anything after October 1st. Personnel impacts in this department does include full-time positions. We do have 23 full-time positions currently identified and 39 employees who are fill part-time positions that would be impacted by this. They do have a few vacant positions, but not very many. Those would be held vacant through October 1st. And they do have the ability for some of their foundations to cover some of their costs, which would offset that at this point. And they're working with their foundations to get approval. So everything that they do through foundations is approved. And so they're trying to get approval to cover some of the salaries with some foundation money in this meantime. Again, we've included an information about the different facilities. There are 3 different facilities, but also multiple programs that is impacted by this short-term shutdown. We kind of summarized the financial aspect of that. We're kind of looking at the programs and facilities, but this is really the financial at the end of the day. What they're estimating for lost revenues between now and October 1st, as well as what we've identified that we can either have cost avoidance or cost reductions, and then the net impact. Of note, the first 2 departments, the Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities and Library Services, are in the general fund, so those are direct impact to the general fund. Arts and Culture, while they are in their own fund, they do receive a transfer from the general fund, so any savings that we have within their program would benefit the general fund and the city as a whole. As we look forward, we mentioned a little bit more about what do the revenues look like. We are currently working on that forecast in total, but we do have our preliminary numbers for the revenue side of the forecast, and we'll continue to work on the expenditure side. So if we look here, back in the spring of 2019, we came to council with estimated revenue forecast. These revenues, by the way, are the major revenues that we look at. That would be your local sales tax, state shared revenues. State shared revenues. State shared revenues have 4 different aspects in there, but those are our major revenues that we look at. That's the bulk of the revenues in the general fund that we're estimating. So when we came to act through in spring of 2019, you can see those are our estimated numbers there for revenues. This is now what we're calling our April 2020 forecast, which is our current forecast as we see it today. That includes the recession that we're experiencing currently, and those are our adjusted numbers. We also then added in the Parks, Recreation anticipated loss in revenues. We did not add in the Arts and Culture here because, again, they're in their own fund, but the more that we can save above and beyond their revenues, that would assist in the citywide. You can see we're looking at a loss of revenues or anticipated loss of revenues this year of about $8.4 million. Next year is about $8.3 million. We do need to note that the 2021 includes that one-time income tax bump of $7.5 million. So if we did not have that $7.5 million kind of bump, unanticipated bump in there, that would increase that to almost $16 million for 2021. So that's what we're looking at for the upcoming budget cycle. Where do we go from here? We're going to continue to update our expenditure forecast and present that to council. Right now, we're anticipating to bring that back to council in 2 weeks. We'll come back with the expenditure side. We're currently rolling that up. Staff is working on it today. They'll have the 2021 estimated budget as though we changed nothing. Remember, we're going forward and saying this was our expected 2021 budget. And then we'll be rolling that into more of a multi-year forecast to see what that looks like and what our ongoing needs would be. And then we'll hope to bring that back within in 2 weeks. So not a week from today, but 2 weeks from today. We hope to have that back. And again, from there, that'll kind of set the magnitude, if you will, on what we need to do for budget modifications on an ongoing basis. And then we'll be bringing that back to council as well. Again, we're shooting for that beginning of June to come back with staff recommendation to council on what budget modifications we want to do both on an ongoing basis and a one-time basis. And then with that, I'll take any questions.
Mayor, can I just real quickly add something to this? I appreciate Candace and her folks putting this together. So we're trying to give a snapshot of what we think it looks like today. But having gone through this before, we know that the sooner we can prepare and begin making adjustments, it benefits us in the long term. So we're being very careful not to overreact, but the fact that the programs, the reductions we're talking about today are closed, are not open to the public, and then we have lots of many of these employees no longer have a responsibility, a task to do. And so we expect that that's going to continue at least through May. And then what we would suggest is we come back at the beginning of June and we make an assessment. What we're saying today is that we don't believe, well, we can tell you today, just even if financially we came back to where we were, we just won't have the time, assuming that the health challenges continue with us through the end of this month and most of May, that our ability to bring back all of the programs that we had expected to have in place for this summer would be very difficult, if not impossible, to bring back up. This is the time of the year right now where we're hiring and planning and putting in place a lot of these programs, so it takes a lot of lead time. But what we are saying, though, that if sometime at the end of May, 1st of June, when we come back to you to evaluate the financial impacts and also assess where we are on the response to COVID, if it appears that there may be an opportunity to bring back some types of programs or similar programs, we want to be able to do that and have that conversation with the council. And then if it doesn't happen in June, we'll have a conversation the end of June, 1st of July about that discussion, about the possibility of bringing back some kind of programming or events or whatever it might be. So we don't want to suggest that we've made a final conclusion, other than what we're telling you is the current programming that was planned for an entire summer just will not be possible to deliver even under the current circumstances. But we do want to make sure that we have the opportunity to pivot and deliver something like similar to these kinds of programming if we're allowed to do so sometime during the summer. So that's our position there. Probably on the most important matter about employees and the impact this is going to have on employees. It is something we talk about every day. We've discussed in quite a bit of detail. While these positions will be eliminated from these particular departments, we're doing everything we can right now to find other positions throughout the rest of the city, as well as we have repositioned many of these or individuals into our Mesa Cares team, where they are providing services and delivering services that we believe will be covered by some of the stimulus dollars. So our goal is to do everything we can to work with these employees, especially starting with the full-time employees, to try to find a place for them, at least for the next weeks and months if we can. And so we're trying to do we're working very hard, working with those employees to see what we can do for them. I can't promise that it will go on forever, but we're going to do everything we can until we get a better idea of what faces us both from the COVID virus as well as financially. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. You know, I think there's been a lot of uncertainty in the community over the last week or two since we began this discussion. I know we've all received a lot of emails from arts advocates and summer aquatics programs advocates, and it really is very sad that some of these programs that are such a huge part of our community and our family life are going to be taken away from us for a period of time. But I like some of the things that I heard Mr. Brady say just a moment ago. I think we need to be nimble. Absolutely. I mean, if COVID-19 were over tomorrow, just getting ready to get back to where we were is going to take, several weeks or months. And that's just not going to happen. But I think if we take, again, I think one of the biggest challenges here is not to overreact and to dig a deeper hole than is necessary to climb out of. So, Mr. Brady, I appreciated some of the things you said about maybe let's have an optimistic plan as well. I mean, maybe one that's not overly realistic, but still, let's say in June, we see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And we think, well, maybe there's some, maybe we can open the pools for a couple of weeks in July and have a very abbreviated, I mean, you can't really overstate the importance of some of these facilities to the families in our community. Maybe it's not realistic, but in addition to having some really scary plans, I'd love to have some optimistic plans as well. And then hopefully reality, will lie somewhere in the middle, and we can do as much as we can, not just for the quality of life of our community, but also, as you indicated, for all the employees, the full-time employees whose livelihoods are attached to this. I get that, the seasonal part-time employees, this is just, a summer where that's not going to happen. But I appreciate maybe let's have an optimistic plan as an option, as well as a more pessimistic option as well. And I think what we do at some point, need to be very public in what our plans are, because families are making their plans, people are making employment plans, and so the sooner we can be absolutely clear on what we know the impacts are going to be, and to what extent additional decisions are yet to be made, I think that will help our constituents and also our employees to make good plans. Council, other comments and discussions on this? Yes, Mr. Luna.
Mr. Brady, thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Candace, for the presentation. This is very difficult for me, and I'm sure for the rest of my colleagues on the Mesa City Council. Mr. Brady, when will we notify employees that they are going to be furloughed? So when will that actually take place?
So Mayor, Councilman Luna, we've already started those conversations this past week because we wanted them to hear it from their supervisors, department directors before it was presented publicly. So we've started those conversations, but we're also starting the conversations about other opportunities if we can find them, specifically for the full-time employees. And as you can see, most of those full-time employees that are impacted are in the arts and culture. And from what I've understood, they've all expressed a willingness to be very flexible and looking for other assignments. So that's what we're doing now after this meeting is we started discussions about what other possible opportunities we might have for them. And again, we're exploring the options. We won't have the guidance from the federal government until next week, is my understanding. But if we can place them in positions where they're assisting us in helping Mesa residents with accessing and distributing the stimulus dollars, we may pivot them into assignments there that they can help us out for the next couple of, at least next month or two, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and doing that. And if we can do that and be able to charge their salaries and to those programs, that's one of our hopes, is that we'll be able to pivot that or place them in other departments that are not currently having reductions that may have opportunities. So we're looking at every possible avenue. We don't want to lose these employees. These are dedicated, loyal employees. They're not being separated because of anything they did. So we're trying to do everything we can. And obviously, as things recover, they get to go right back to their positions where they were before. Even if we end up having to lay them off, we will, as soon as the opportunity comes and that position's made available, they'll be the first persons, individuals that we'll contact to fill that position.
So the plan would be also to revisit this sometime within the next 45 days to see if the COVID virus has subsided somewhat and whether we can actually look at facilities and reopening them if that's a possibility. Is that correct?
Yes, Mayor and Councilman Luna, and I had this conversation with Councilmember Duff the other day. It's like, you know, as soon as small businesses, restaurants have the opportunity to bring people back into their businesses, I'm assuming we would have the same, you know, those restrictions as far as social gathering will be reduced, or we'll be able to do the same thing. And so we want to bring back activity as fast as they're able to bring back activity. Now, it won't be the same types of programs or the quantity of programs, obviously, but we understand that we have a responsibility to bring a lot of those facilities back up for a lot of social reasons, and so we would look at that as soon as those guidance or restrictions are lifted. We'll be come back to council and have that conversation. Now, it's one thing to have the health part of this restrictions eliminated. We'll also have to evaluate the impact that all this is having on the economic recovery. But I do believe we could come back in some form or fashion, and it'll be different. But we understand we have a responsibility to look at bringing some semblance of those activities back online.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, David. Jen?
Yes. I know we've had a lot of conversations about this, and thank you, Mr. Brady, for the conversation that we had yesterday in quite a bit of detail. But I just want to say publicly how I realize that these closures that we have going on in all these facilities, it not only impacts, of course, our city employees and our obligations to them, but to our citizens and their welfare in their daily lives, especially at a time of this uncertainty and impact, and how we rely on those arts and sports and libraries and to keep us in touch with our humanity and allow us to get through these tough times. But there's also the economic impact that I've spoke about many times that we have, especially around the arts facilities, the convention center, the Mesa Amphitheater. There is an economic impact that's exponential, and it impacts our sales and hotel taxes. So as we close those facilities, it can deepen some of our financial woes. I have a question about employees. What is the difference between furloughing and laying off? And I don't know if I answered that. I have some other comments as well. And how long would it take to reinstate those employees once we're given the go-ahead? Also, I think we have the commitment here, but also that we are reevaluating every 30 days, staying flexible, coming back with modified or abbreviated programming as we can, so that we're not publicly committing to a September 30th, nothing is going on. We are not going to open those facilities or do anything. We're reevaluating every 30 days, and we'll bring back as much as we can as soon as we can. And that I'd like to know what our reserve balance is. So the two outstanding questions I have is a reserve balance and on furloughing versus laying off employees and what that means.
Okay, Mayor and Council Duff, I'll try to answer at least how I understand the difference between furlough and layoff, and I'll let Candace speak to our general fund balances. So in my mind, the actions we take when we talk about reduction in workforce, that suggests a complete separation between the city and that employee. After the time we identify the position that it needs to be eliminated, then we go through a process of working through our policies regarding separation and severance, And that's been established for some time. We've clarified that with our Human Resources Department. And so depending on your tenure with the city, it will determine what that payout looks like, but there is a policy in place, and that's a complete separation. So the position's been eliminated, the individual's no longer an employee with the city of Mesa. However, we do identify that individual and that position, and so at some future point when that position becomes needed again, then we create the list, and that person is the first person we contact to fill that position. It's essentially held for them, and then we contact them, and if they're still available and interested, then they're allowed to come back to the city to sit in that position again. Furlough is oftentimes, at least how I've heard the reference to it, is often we hear it at the federal level. Oftentimes when there's a shutdown in the government and they furlough governmental employees, while they're no longer working and no longer getting paid during the time of the shutdown of the government, when the government comes back online, then those employees then receive their back pay and benefits. So we're not proposing furloughing. We're only proposing either moving individuals into other positions where they can be until we get through this, or we actually do a reduction in workforce where they are laid off and separated from the city.
One other question on regarding the employees is, once we decided we need to we're opening up our facilities and bringing back full programming, how long does it typically take to fill that position? Yes, we'll call the people who are on the list. Does that take 30 days in order to make that phone call, get them reinstated and working again? Is it longer? What is the lead time?
I think that's what the benefit of that option is, that as soon as we determine that that position needs to be filled again and we have the budget to do that, it's a phone call, and they come in and probably sign a few forms to sign up with their selected healthcare benefits and deductions, and they come on board. It's not, we don't go, essentially what I do is I waive the recruitment process. So these positions do not go through a recruitment process. They don't have to be posted. They don't have to be made available for anybody else to apply to, which is typically where it takes time to fill positions. It's just, it only is open to that individual, and then we'll give them probably a week or two to make a decision about whether they want to come back. But as soon as they make that decision, if we've already made a determination we need that position, they just come right back to the city and sign back up with the city's forms, and we're ready to bring them on board.
And during this time, then they can, of course, collect unemployment.
Yes.
And do they lose their insurance benefits? I assume it's a termination, so yes, and until they're reinstated.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Council, other questions?
Fund balance. Mayor?
Yes, Candace.
Councilmember Duff had some additional questions on fund balance dollar amounts, and so I wanted to give you those. So for fiscal year 18-19, in the general governmental, we had an ending fund balance of $90.5 million. That was 19.3% fund balance reserves. For even with our projection for this year, with our projected loss in revenues, for 19-20, we are still projecting that we're going to end at $76.8 million, which is a 16.1% of next year's budget if we were to adopt next year's budget without any modifications. So once we make modifications, that percentage would then go up. But right now, we're projecting 16% ending fund balance at the end of this year with no modifications to expenses.
What is a desirable reserve balance for cities? Is it like a 10%? Or what is the goal usually in order to be financially viable?
So Mayor and Councilmember Duff, the financial policies for the city of Mesa as adopted by the city council call for us to maintain between an 8 to 10% ending fund balance each year.
So I imagine with our proposed budget that we have here and the cuts, that we are using part of our reserve balance in order to fill the gap.
Yes, Mayor and Councilmember Duff, that is correct. Right now, again, remember, we set aside about $7 million in reserves. That's not included in these numbers. So we do not need to draw on that $7 million at this time. It would just be using our fund balance that we've accumulated over the last few years.
And would there be a consideration to dive deeper into that, and so that we don't have to have a severe cuts?
So one of the things that you want to look at is your fund balances, consider those as one-time money. So you can use those one time. What we want to do is we need to look at the ongoing, what are our ongoing reductions that we might need to make. But yes, the ending fund balances can be used as one-time money for right now.
So Mayor and Councilor Duff's a good question. What we're not showing you right now, as part of our assessment, is that fund balance is impacted by net uses, resources, and its net income, net losses. And what we're seeing is, what we're concerned about is not knowing what the impact of our sales tax looks like and what our current level of spending looks like. We don't know if that's sustainable. And right now we're seeing net losses out for the next 3 or 4 years. So that fund balance begins to continually decrease. And so we don't want it to get critically low. So we have to watch that today. And right now we're sustaining ourselves, it looks like, assuming we're using the right numbers, which I'm not highly confident we know what numbers to use. We still see a net decrease year over year where we're spending more money than we're bringing in, and that won't be sustainable. We can do that for 2 or 3 years, but we can't. I think it's about the 4th or 5th year, maybe a little, where that gets below our threshold. And you can't make changes to your budget overnight without it being critically impactful to your operations. So what we're hoping to do is get our budget, as we come to council over every June, July, August, we're going to be talking about that and looking about that sustainability, so that our net losses, we need to find a way to look at diminishing those so that they don't keep drawing down the fund balance. We don't want to leave an ending fund balance below 10% and have to deal with that in 1 year. That would be very painful, and it would impact every single department. And remember, in the general fund, these cuts that we're talking about today are, it's a $400 million general fund budget. These are rarely insignificant. What we're trying to prevent is the impact that may be coming, where we have to look at where the real larger, the most significant dollars is all in public safety. And so we're trying to do everything we can right now to avoid that, but that may be coming as we look at not necessarily laying off in public safety, but pulling back expenses and pulling back hiring, if that's what it comes down to. If we have to go beyond the September, October timeframe, that's what we're trying to mitigate against right now, is making decisions today to avoid those impacts. Because while our fund balances sound healthy today, they are, but if you take the assumption of our expenditures and revenues out for the next 5, 6, 7 years, it's not sustainable. It starts drawing it down pretty quickly, and that's what we're trying to avoid now.
Thank you for that. And I realize we need to make budget decisions in order to operate as smoothly as possible. And that the economic impact from this virus will probably be ongoing, not as severe as it is currently or within the next 6 months, but it's going to take a while for us to fully recover. Whether I'm no expert on this, but expectations, it would take a year or two. It'll probably take a year before we have the vaccine, and maybe 2 years before we're in full bore, and then it'll take off very quickly. So the economic impact is not in our immediate situation, but it will be ongoing for a little while, so that we need to prepare for that. So I appreciate that planning. But also in our planning as a city, that we need to be cognizant of making decisions that don't deepen any recession or economic impact. So if with closures or whatever we're doing, to make sure that it is not impacting our city in a negative way, in which it's making that struggle even longer and harder. Also, and I hate to put Candace on the spot right now, but I just thought of, what is our sales tax for 2019, a year ago, for April and May? What kind of revenues are we looking at that will be severely impacted versus this year on our budget?
So Mayor and Councilmember Duff, those are included when we looked at the 1920. So when you're looking at that kind of, at the end of the day, this year, we think we're going to be down about $6.6 million overall in our revenues. And to give you just an idea of, we don't want to underestimate or understate, I guess, the recession. The recession that we're currently looking at, we expected at the end of this year to be $11 million over our actual budget, our adopted budget, and we're actually going to end $6.6 million, or we're anticipating ending $6.6 million under the budget. So that is over a $17 million swing in the economy itself. So when you're looking at that, that's a swing in the economy. It's not necessarily the impact to our budget because we hadn't planned on those $11 million. At least not yet. You know, if we had come to you in February, we would have been saying, wow, it looks really great. We had a great Christmas and we think we're going to end the year up. But, you know, that's what we thought in February, and then March came along. Now we think we'll be at $6.6 million below the adopted budget for 1920. So that just kind of shows you what's happening right now in the economy. That is over a $17 million swing in the economy. It's not a $17 million swing in our budget impact, and we want to make sure that that's clear. It's a $17 million swing in the economy, but we hadn't planned on that great fall that we had in sales tax. And so that's why when you're looking at 1920, you're seeing kind of that's that $6.6 million on slide 10. That'll show you where we think we're going to end based on last year to this year. What it doesn't accommodate is all that great revenue that we had in the fall. So remember, that was kind of on our good news slide last week, was we had a really good fall, and what that's doing is it's cushioning the impact of the recession right now. So we're going to end 1920 only down 6.6 rather than down even farther, because we had those great gains in the fall. And then we've continued that into 2021, and we should talk about, again, we'll keep looking at this. But when we're looking at our revenues, we have to anticipate, as part of our forecast, when are we going to start the recovery and how quickly or slowly will we have that recovery? So right now in our forecast, we right now have our recovery starting in July at a modest pace. We're going to keep assessing that. Does that need to be moved? Does it need to be moved to August or September? Is the pace of recovery going to change? It will be faster because it's an artificial decrease in demand. Will it come back faster than we think? Will it come back slower? So we're looking at all of those, all of those are in our assumptions. Right now, we're pretty, based on what we have today for information, we're comfortable with the numbers we have here, and we're comfortable with the approach we're taking at doing a constant kind of every 30 days, we're going to reassess. Is there anything significant that's going to change the impact going forward? I mean, unfortunately, it caught us in the middle of spring training. That wasn't so great. You know, a few more weeks and we would have had our spring training done. But we're going to keep assessing that and looking. But just to give you an idea, it is pretty deep right now for the recession. It's deeper than we thought. But again, we're going to be coming back faster. And it looks like we've got, so we put up, I think, is that our sales tax?
Yes, this is Mayor, Council. This is our total sales tax revenues that's on the data portal, and this is by calendar year. So if you notice in March, that's the spring training that Candace was speaking about, is where we get the big bump in March. That last March of 2019, we had just about, I think, $19.7 million in revenue. We are looking, since with spring training being canceled in the beginning of March, we are looking at a significant dip in that revenue for coming up. That little yellow dot on the far left, that is January of 2020. This is updated every month with the DOR revenue. So that's why we only have January right now uploaded. So as you notice that 2019 was a significant year for sales tax for us because the next one down there below is 2018. So, but we are looking at a significant decrease in our sales tax due to the pandemic.
And then also, just a note on that, and thank you, Brent. So this kind of give a plug for open data right now. So what Brian was showing you is actually available. That's out on the portal. So anybody can look at that every month and see how the sales tax is doing year over year. So what he pulled up was just out of our application called Socrata. It's out on our open data portal on the mesaaz.gov. If you go to data portal and you go into sales tax, you can take a look at that and see where we're going. And like you said, based on the Department of Revenue, we're 2 months behind. So we can see what happened 2 months ago when we look at that going forward. So, and many of the things are out there as well. Again, we'll keep updating this. And I guess just as a note, when we're talking about forecasting, we're not taking, and we can go into this, anyone who'd like additional details about how we put this together, we'd be happy to talk to you about them. But just so that you know, we don't just take a blanket percentage across. So our staff looks at the sales tax, we're looking at the individual, whether it's retail, whether it's restaurant and bars, whether it's rentals. We look at the individual categories, and then we do an assessment by month on what we think this recession is impacting it. So one category will be impacted greater, for example, restaurants and bars right now. Obviously, they're closed. So they're impacted much greater than the other categories of sales tax. And so we look at that by category, but also by month. And so our staff is working on that diligently. If we know anything, if we see any more information or we get information from other cities, we're in contact with, we have an East Valley budget group that we contact, and we kind of share information about how they're doing, what they're seeing in their towns versus us. And so it's kind of a constant messaging and a constant update of if we see something significant, then we'll put it into the model and see if there's a significant difference in the overall forecast. And so this is something we're constantly working on. And again, it's not a blanket, but it is by category, by month. We're looking at the state as well, because remember, state shared revenues are a large focus for us. The good thing is with the income tax at the state, I guess good and bad, the good thing is there's a 2-year delay. So the income that's not coming in this year, we won't see those impacts to the city for another 2 years. And we have that modeled into our forecast as well. So you kind of see that delay as well there.
Thank you very much for the overview and review on some of these things, because it is kind of overwhelming. Do we have any insight on the sales tax as far as what to expect? We don't receive our sales tax till 2 months afterwards. And so it's really hard to, when we're trying to react so quickly in our plans, like reviewing everything every 30 days, and then we don't get our sales tax for 2 months afterwards. It's really hard to make those decisions on where to go. Do you have any information as far as reporting even before the revenues in order for us to see measure our economic recovery quickly? I think with sales tax for our city is critical because it's the largest pot that we have to run our city. We don't have any other revenues that are as large that support our city.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Duff, we used to when we collected it ourselves, but the state took that over 4 or 5 years ago. And since then, that's as fast as they get that information to us. So all the information goes to them first. We don't really have a whole lot of insight until we get those reports from them.
I know, Mayor and Councilmember Duff, the one thing that we do have, though, is Mesa historical data. And so what we can see and what we have done and included in our forecast is how did Mesa fare in previous recessions? So not just the Great Recession that we all remember because it's the most recent one and it was so large, but also just a normal cyclical recession. So we went back and looked at a recession from 91. We looked at a recession from 2001. And so those are Mesa's experience, and what did Mesa experience? And that's what we've used as experience for this, and what we put into this one is do we think we were the same as as 91? Do we think we're the same as 01? What is the, how fast or, how deep, how fast of recovery? So we have that data. We know how deep it was in previous recessions, how long it took us to recover in previous recessions, and we've looked at that and kind of used that as a guideline for including our forecast today. We won't know how close we are, obviously, until, again, we're looking in the rearview mirror until we get that information. But at least we're not blind. We are looking back to what Mesa's experience was with previous recessions and then applying that going forward.
I appreciate that, but with the virus, and I'm not trying to take any away from anything that you're planning. You do a lot of planning and a lot of projections and trying to anticipate it so that we do have a budget that has worked very well for us. So I don't want to take anything away from what you do. I appreciate it, and I think you're fantastic at your job. Given the virus, though, the impacts economically are much different. And so if we're given the go-ahead to open up bars and restaurants and retail, we'll see a sharp upward on the sales tax that we weren't. So it won't be a slow recovery, as you know, in a regular recession. So I wish there was some kind of reporting that we could get from the state to know how things are going so that we don't wait for 2 months afterwards, especially when we expect that when we're given some leeway that we can possibly recapture some revenues quickly. And I realize it may not always be upward. We might open up things and then have to close down a little bit and dealing with this virus over the next year. But if we could get some kind of reporting from the state to help us, let us know how things are going, I think it would help us make better decisions on the closures and the things that we have to do in order to have a budget that we can be responsible for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, Council, other questions for Candace?
I got a question. I'm looking for clarification on this PowerPoint. What are we doing moving forward? Are we talking about just laying off employees that are directly affected by closed facilities, or are we looking at also going deeper and laying off employees who aren't related directly to the closed facilities?
So Mayor and Councilmember Whitaker, at this time, again, we're in the second phase, if you will, or the second tier. So right now, we're only looking at the closed facilities. Citywide, we're only looking at holding all of the vacancies currently and not doing any recruiting activities for those. But at this time, we have not identified positions outside of the closed facilities that would be impacted, or employees that would be impacted. That will be our next phase. Again, we need to do the expenditure side of the forecast. We think we have a good handle on the revenue side of the forecast. We're currently working on the expenditure side. We'll come back to you in 2 weeks with the expenditure side. That will actually show what type of ongoing reductions we may need in order to be sustainable in the future. And then that would then impact the city as a whole. And we'd expect to come back to you in the beginning of June with those recommendations for positions either to be laid off or reduced, or other operational modifications that we'd want to make. So right now, we're only impacting those employees related to closed facilities, but come the beginning of June, it would be a citywide recommendation for modifications.
And come the June meeting, we're already exploring those options, or is that on pause? Help me understand the process that's going on in the background. Coming
in June would be actually us coming forward with the recommendations. We'll be working on those between now and June with the departments and city management to pull together what not only the capacity or the dollar amount that we're looking for, how much is ongoing, how much is one time, and then also the implementation plan. So it will look similar to what we presented today with the closed facilities. It will basically be those plans, only citywide. And that would be what we bring back to you in June. So no, June would not be coming back to just kind of say where we're at. June would be coming back with actual recommendations, asking for council to give direction on implementation.
Okay, great. So I just want to rehash something I said in the last meeting, is that I think that we need to look at salary cuts at the top, not excluding council or our own personal salaries before we move to the second phase and start reducing staff that we consider key staff in the city. And, I know I disagree. Everyone disagrees with my other analysis. And, I still think that we need to start looking closely at these capital expenditure projects and reduce those. I get that, contractors will be laid off if we stop construction on certain projects. But at the same time, if we're spending money that we could be using to, keep our key personnel, then, I'm all for closing construction projects to keep ourselves staffed first. So I'll stop on that note.
Thank you. Council, other questions or comments on this item? Okay. Seeing none, Mr. Brady, anything else from staff before we move on?
I think we're done, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda for this meeting is item 2A. That's to acknowledge receipts of minutes of various boards and committees. A motion to the minutes from the Museum and Cultural Advisory. Thank you, Mr. Luna, and a second by Mr. Thompson. Thank you. It's necessary to do a roll call vote. I vote aye. Mr. Freeman.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Heredia.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Duff.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Luna.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. The next item on our agenda is current event summary, including meetings and conferences attended. I know, Council, you've all been very active, despite the limitations that we're under. Anything you'd like to share with Mr. Freeman?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm hosting a lead city for National League of Cities for the large city council. So tomorrow we'll have a conference call inviting our large cities across the United States, and we are the host city. So that's kind of a first for us, being able to have that opportunity. They're really excited. I talked about the agenda about Mesa Cares program, and that's something that is going to be hot on the agenda, how we are, kudos to staff, city management about putting this together. Also, I know we've been talking about some heavy stuff, but I have a little video on my council Facebook if somebody wants to see it about maybe lightning in spite of difficult times. So with that, thank you. It's had about 2,000 reviews on Facebook. So anyway, take care and looking forward to other council reports.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I'm now really curious to look at the video that's on your Facebook. Mr. Luna.
Yes, Mayor, I've been quite busy as well. Thank you for your messages that you give, because my staff, as well as Marisa from Facebook en Español, we translate those messages, and I've been giving almost daily updates to our Spanish-speaking community. We're hoping that we can do, I know today you have your summit related to education. We're hoping that we can do one as well, so we can speak with our Spanish-speaking community related to how they can take advantage of some of the educational benefits that are provided by our larger institutions and how we can provide resources for them. So I'm appreciative of what you're doing in terms of your leadership, and I'm able to go ahead and talk about those in Spanish. I'm also been involved with the National League of Cities. Next week, we are planning a joint constituency meeting with all the constituency groups of the National League of Cities to talk about our responses to the COVID virus. I did speak to them about the Mesa Cares program. Very excited about that. I'm excited that I'll be able to speak with all our group members about Mesa Cares and what we're doing relative to the city of Mesa.
Thank you, Mr. Luna, and thank you very much for the communication that you've been doing, the outreach to the Spanish-speaking residents of Mesa. It's been can't overstate the value of that. And thank you also for taking up the education issue in Spanish. As long as we're talking about that, let me just remind, I know everyone probably knows this, but today at 1 o'clock, we will be doing the next summit, and the topic will be education. We'll have Dr. Pete Lesser, the superintendent of Mesa Public Schools, Dr. Lori Berkman, president of Mesa Community College, and then our own Heather Wolf, just helping to answer questions that families have about how to negotiate this period of time where our kids can't go to school physically and they're learning remotely, and what the resources are and what the challenges are. I think we're all maybe kind of underestimating the impact of the school closures in terms of the emotional and psychological impact on our communities and our families. So I think we need to take a serious look at what we can do to make sure that our families are going to come out of this not just physically healthy, but emotionally and psychologically healthy as well. So thank you, David, for being engaged in all that great communication. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Council, other comments regarding this? Yes, Jen.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to wish everybody who observes Easter a very happy Easter. Tomorrow is Good Friday, and for all of us to give gratitude and prayers for what we do have, prayers to those who are in need, and know that we too will recover and rise again from this pandemic and our status of our society now, and that we all find hope in the story of Easter. So wishing everybody who observes it a happy Easter.
Thank you, Jan. And I know there are many of the faith groups in Mesa that are joining together tomorrow on Good Friday to have a day of fasting and prayer, praying for a quick resolution of the health challenges that we face globally. So it is, thank you, that wonderfully appropriate reminder that the Easter season, and particularly tomorrow, this interfaith effort that many are contributing or participating in the community, to have a day of fast and prayer to look for additional help for our community. Council, other comments under this agenda item? All right, seeing none, the next item is schedule of meetings. Mr. Brady, can you remind us when our next meeting is, please?
Thank you, Mayor. We will have scheduled, we have scheduled our Tuesday 2 p.m. study session to get continued updates from our public safety folks as well as Mesa Cares. Okay, thank you. That concludes the items on our agenda for this meeting. We'll get together next Tuesday afternoon at 2. We can do a unanimous consent adjournment. Is there someone who would like to move for adjournment? Thank you, Mr. Freeman. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. We are adjourned by unanimous consent.